its students are able to develop and grow to become their best. Together, we embrace our diversity to grow the future together. For Indonesia, for the world. Universitas Indonesia. Unity in diversity. Universitas Indonesia. Veritas, Probitas, Justisia. This is Indonesia, a land of immeasurable diversity, a land that offers vast opportunities. This is the nexus of hopes and aspirations from across the archipelago.
Bersama, kami berikan kontribusi nyata lewat inovasi, karya cipta, dan pencapaian lain sesuai bidang ilmu. Dari UI, untuk Indonesia yang toleran, unggul, dan bermartabat.
Welcome to Universitas Indonesia. Since our beginnings, Universitas Indonesia has been continually evolving and building upon our achievements. We have become the biggest, best, and leading university in Indonesia and also Asia. Here at Universitas Indonesia, the best and brightest from across the region come to study. From diverse backgrounds, we build an intellectual community that enriches and enhances humanity. For superior generations, Universitas Indonesia provides world-class learning facilities. We implement state-of-the-art technology for research and industrial development. Our campus is accessible to all, also to the disabled. This is our commitment for realizing an inclusive educational
Right. Okay. Good morning, Shelly, and good afternoon for everybody else. Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, Om Swastiastu, Shalom, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Okay. Greetings to the Dean of the Faculty of Psychology, Universitas Indonesia, Dr. Chutrifa Metia Umar Ali, MA Psikolog. To the head of the Master Study Program of the Faculty of Psychology, Universitas Indonesia, Dr. Rizka Halida, MSc. To the speakers, Dr. Shelly Mckeon Jones and Dr. Mira Nurmila, and all of the audience attending here. Before we begin, let me introduce myself. My name is Jovarian Hudiana, and I'm here as one of the lecturers at the Faculty of Psychology, Universitas Indonesia. And I will guide you throughout this event as a moderator. Before we begin, we would like to hear the opening speech by our Dean of the Faculty of Psychology, Universitas Indonesia, Dr. Chutrifa Metia Umar Ali, MA Psikolog. The stage is yours, Bu Dekan.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning to friends in the UK and good afternoon to friends in Indonesia. The Faculty of Psychology Universitas Indonesia is pleased to welcome all participants in our online seminar titled Psychology of Intergroup Relations, Opportunities and Challenge for Youth Living in Diverse Social Contexts. The seminar is expected to be a way to communicate and discuss research findings from psychology. The findings, we believe, will be important to be developed and applied to address social issues in Indonesia and other parts of the world. The seminar's special feature is that it raises a topic that now is being more crucial in many places, intergroup relations. In the midst of populism and political polarizations rising globally, people from different groups can easily form stereotypes and prejudice toward other groups. Even the government policy could lead to discrimination towards certain groups based on those stereotypes and prejudice. Moreover, those negative attitudes and behavior can be adopted by our youth, risking our future generations. This situation calls us who have been studied psychology to take part in ways to improve our societies. Our discipline has a long history of studying intergroup behavior. It is the right time for us to share the findings with our students and also the public. We are honored to have Dr. Shelly Mckeon from the University of Bristol, UK, as our first speaker. She is one of the leading social psychology researchers in the intergroup topic, especially in European context. We also honored to have Dr. Mila Nurmila, our faculty member who has been spent her time researching extremism and religious radicalism. Together, our speakers will share their research findings and experience about opportunities and challenges for us living in a diverse social context, especially the youth. We are also pleased that many are interested in attending today's seminar. We wish you a happy and fruitful discussion during our event today. Thank you and stay healthy and safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Dekan, for your opening speech. And we will continue the opening speech before we begin our event by the head of the Master Study Program, Faculty of Psychology, Universitas Indonesia, Ibu Dr. Rizka Halida, MSI. The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Hello to all participants. It is our pleasure to have you all here to learn and discuss our special topic today. The topic is the psychology of intergroup relations, challenges and opportunities for youth living in diverse social contexts. Our event today is conducted by the Master of Psychology program in collaboration with the Laboratory of Political Psychology, one of our lab in the Faculty of Psychology, Universitas Indonesia. Here in our master program, we are committed to develop our understanding of human behavior through research, collaboration with scholars from different parts of the world, and disseminate psychological research to our students and the public. We aim to improve our scientific knowledge and theories about psychology in order to answer the problems in real-life contexts. Our event today is one way to show our commitment and to achieve our aim. We are keen to learn from our speakers today about challenges and opportunities for youth who live in a diverse social context. Our youth may experience stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. They have been posed to prejudice relations, but at the same time, they need to come out and take action to improve their societies. And it is our job to learn and move together with our youth to improve intergroup relations in our surroundings. My special thanks to our speakers today who are willing to share their research and experience. Dr. Shelly Mckeon, the Associate Professor at the University of Bristol, United Kingdom, and Dr. Mira Nurmila, Associate Professor in our faculty. Dr. Jones' publication showed her works and expertise in the social psychology of intergroup relations, and Dr. Mila's works have been about the social psychology of Islamic extremism. Both of them will share their thought and discuss more with us today. I thank the Dean of Faculty of Psychology, Universitas Indonesia, Dr. Chutrifa Mutia Umar Ali, MA Psikolog, for her support in conducting this event. I also thank the Laboratory of Political Psychology led by Professor Hamdi Muluk for their collaboration in this seminar. I hope this seminar brings more understandings, triggers more discussions and actions about youth's role in improving intergroup relation in our societies. Thank you.
Thank you for the opening remarks, Dr. Rizka. All right. Before we begin our event today, I want to inform you all about the regulations for today's seminar. I'm going to read several points that we need to be mindful about for this seminar. Okay, first, please make sure that your internet connection is stable during this event. Second, have decent distance from your personal computer, laptop, or your mobile device. Third, pay attention to the ergonomic comfort of your sitting position during the event. And four, pay attention to electrical hazards in the charger cable or switch around you. And five, prioritize health during the COVID-19 pandemic, and please enjoy the event. All right, so let's begin this webinar. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our esteemed speaker today. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Shelly Mckeon Jones. Mbak Medi, could you please show her CV? All right. So, Dr. Shelly Mckeon Jones is an associate professor in social psychology at the University of Bristol, United Kingdom. And her research focus is, she's, from what I see here, she's a social psychologist with focuses on the peace psychology, right? So her focus here is in the segregation, in the reducing prejudice, in the pro-social behavior, empathy, and also identity. I've read several of her works. A lot of her works deal with the administration of the contact theory in several youth samples and populations. So I can't wait to hear about that. Okay, so she also received numerous research grants, including ESRC standard grant, which in total it amount to £634,000. Which with the project titled Shared Spaces, the how, when, and why of adolescent intergroup interactions. She has also received numerous awards. Most recently, she received the Mckeon's Early Career Award for substantial contributions to peace psychology from the American Psychological Association, or APA, Division 48. Other than her academic career, she is also a chair in the British Psychological Society in the section of social psychology. She is also a governing council member in the International Society of Political Psychology, a committee member in the British Psychological Society, the Undergraduate Education Committee, and also a co-chair in the International Network for Peace Psychology. Ladies and gentlemen, we are really proud to introduce you to our speaker for today, Dr. Shelly Mckeon Jones. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much for the huge warm welcome. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to speak with you today about my research. I was really, I don't know how to say it. I was so excited to have the opportunity to speak with you because I'm really passionate about the research topic that this webinar is focusing on today. And I think, you know, my research can say some things that could be relevant for the Indonesian context and some things that won't be. So I'm really looking forward to the discussions that we will have. So hopefully you can see my screen. I'm just messing around with the with the sharing features. You can see it. Yes. Okay, good. Okay, so again, thank you for the warm welcome. It's fantastic to be here. As Joe has said, my name is Shelly Mckeon Jones, and what I'll talk to you today about is some of my research in the area of intergroup contact. So I'm going to begin the talk by telling you a little bit about me first. So more about my career and where I've come from and the kind of things that have influenced me and the research that I do today. I'll talk to you about intergroup contact theory, which is the theoretical framework that I mostly work with in my research. I'll also tell you then about the context of Northern Ireland, which is where I'm from. So Northern Ireland is within the UK context, but is a conflict setting. So I'll tell you about that setting and also about some of the work that I've done there, and then end with a little bit around education and why I think education is really important for young people to promote more positive intergroup relations in society. So who am I? Well, I completed my undergraduate degree in social psychology at the University of Ulster in 2008. And then I went on to do a PhD in social psychology, also at the University of Ulster. And I worked with a professor there called Professor Ed Cairns, and he's done a lot of research on children growing up in conflict and what that means and the consequences of that for young people, for society in general, and basically how we can promote peace and promote more positive relations between groups. I then, in 2012, went to work as a lecturer in psychology in England at the University of Hertfordshire. Then I worked for a year in the Netherlands, which was fantastic, so also in another part of Europe. And now for the last 7 or 8 years, I've been working at the University of Bristol in England, in the UK. So at Bristol, what do I do? Well, I teach social psychology and research methods. I also am our school research director, which means I support colleagues with research, and I work on a number of projects. So broadly speaking, my research focuses on understanding and improving intergroup relations, particularly amongst children and young people. So the majority of my work involves working with 14, 15, 11-year-olds to kind of understand how they're experiencing the societies that they're growing up in. And the idea behind this is, for me, young people are the future generations in society. They are the ones that are going to be our future leaders. They are the ones that are going to bring about social change and promote better things within our society. So I am going to talk about some various aspects of that work, primarily in terms of what I've been doing in Northern Ireland. So I'm going to begin with this parable. And this parable is from Gordon Allport's book on the nature of prejudice. And if we read this, okay, so you see that man over there? Yes. Well, I hate him, but you don't know him. That's why I hate him. And for me, this parable really epitomizes the idea of my work. We categorize ourselves into groups. We understand and think we know about those groups based on what the media tells us, based on what other people tell us, and we behave accordingly. You are different, therefore I'm unsure about you. So I don't know you, but I know I don't like you because you're a member of a particular group, or you're a part of something that I don't belong to, or I don't feel that I know much about. So this is a kind of basis of a lot of the work that I do, working with this assumption that actually we're often a little bit nervous of difference. So thinking then about that within the context of where I'm living and working, my research really tries to understand how we can promote more positive relations in conflict and diverse settings. So conflict settings like Northern Ireland, where there's a history of political violence, and diverse settings like England, where there is growing ethnic diversity and also tensions associated with that diversity. And this is not a unique context, because societies across the world are also experiencing rising levels of diversity. We're moving around the world more. We're meeting more and more people. We need to be ready to engage with difference and to engage with that in a positive and meaningful way. At the same time, what we see across Europe and in the UK context is, with this rise in diversity, a rise in tension. So ethnic hate crimes have been on the rise. We've seen more and more tensions, especially around Brexit in the UK, which we can talk about another point if you're interested. So I want to talk here about the positive side of this. So how can we take this challenge and show or support the idea that young people can make a difference in society? Now, historically, and I'm sure this is probably also the narrative in Indonesia as well, that often young people are seen as either victims of conflict, so bystanders who are affected by conflict, or participators or engagers or troublemakers, okay? So the ones out invoking some trouble. But actually what we're really interested in is the idea that youth are also peacemakers. They're positive participators in society, and we need to know more about how we can support young people to engage positively in society in a way that positively impacts individuals, groups, and society as a whole. So what we try to do in this research is move beyond the idea that young people are either victims or troublemakers, and that they're actually peacemakers, right? And that they can consolidate and promote peace in different settings. So much of my research focuses on something called intergroup contact theory. And some of you will be aware of this and others will not. At the most basic level, what intergroup contact theory says is that if you bring people who don't like each other, or people who are from different groups, for example, different religious groups, different racial groups, you bring them together in a positive and meaningful way, that they will have positive and meaningful contact, so interactions, conversations with one another. And as a consequence of that positive contact, they will feel less prejudice towards that group. Okay, so it's this idea really around this kind of meaningful and positive interaction. Now, intergroup contact is said to work best under certain conditions. So one is of equal status, and immediately this one raises alarm bells for me, because often we have conflict because there is unequal status, right? Because one group has more resources, one group has more land, one group is more dominant than the other, and often that causes conflict. But what contact theory would say is within the contact situation. So for example, if you're in a school and you're bringing young people from different religious groups together, that what you do is within that room, within that school context, that everyone is equal, right? We are all valued. We are all of equal status within this contact context. Two other conditions are cooperation and common goals, and these work together. So imagine again a school context, you've got young people working on a project, their common goal is to complete this project, and they're working together to do that. And then the final aspect of this is social or institutional support. And this one is a little less clear in the literature in terms of what this means, but my conceptualization is around, again, if we take a school context example, that the teachers and the school have an ethos of embracing difference, of diversity, of showing support for interactions between people from different groups. So we know that contact works, and we know that it can be really great in reducing prejudice. And my research tends to focus on two aspects around contact. One is understanding whether when people have the opportunity for contact, do they actually engage in it? And what I mean by that is if you look at the public spaces around you, so beaches, cafes, school classrooms, public transport, do people who are different interact even though they're together, or do they stay separate? Often they stay separate, actually, because we tend to be more comfortable interacting with people who are from the same group as ourselves. The other side of my work on contact theory looks at the effects that contact have on reducing prejudice, but also beyond that. So things like engagement in society, health, well-being, and educational outcomes. So I guess there are two stories here with intergroup contact. One is that we know that it can be really good. The other is that we know that it often doesn't happen whenever the opportunity is there. So what this means for me is that we have to accept that there are limits of contact. So people in very highly politically charged areas or areas of lots of violence are not going to feel comfortable, or it will not be safe to go and talk to people from the other side or the other group. So we have to recognize that there are some limits, but actually when contact is available, when there is the opportunity to do it, when it's safe and appropriate to do so, that it can be really positive. So why is it positive? What are the kind of things that contact does? Well, it reduces prejudice, it challenges stereotypes, right? So if we hold stereotypes, oh, I think, such and such people behave like this. Well, actually, when you interact with them and you see that that's not the case, that challenges that narrative that you have in your head about that group. It also can make you feel less anxious about interacting with a different group. It can make you feel less threatened, but it also can have wider consequences for you and for society. So what I want to do now is tell you a little bit about the work that I've been doing in Northern Ireland in terms of contact theory and beyond. So Northern Ireland is part of the island of Ireland, which is in Europe, and Northern Ireland is part of the UK. So this is a kind of close-up map of Northern Ireland. So this is the island of Ireland here, and Northern Ireland is a small bit in the north of the island. So Northern Ireland is a conflict setting, a post-conflict setting. The north, so Northern Ireland, was partitioned in 1921 from the rest of the island of Ireland. And there has been tension on the island for hundreds and hundreds of years. The most recent period of conflict is known as the Troubles, so known colloquially as the Troubles. And this conflict really escalated due to differences in how people wanted the island to be. So whether people wanted Northern Ireland to be part of the Republic of Ireland altogether as an island of Ireland, or whether people wanted Northern Ireland to be part of the United Kingdom. So it's really to do with the constitutional state of the island. Now, the interesting thing about Northern Ireland is that the groups are labelled as Catholic and Protestant. And actually, it's not really about religious differences. It's about this political difference around the island of Ireland and how people want this island to be constructed. Now, Northern Ireland is quite small, so it has a population of about 1.8 million, about 48% people who identify as Protestant, so people who traditionally would want Northern Ireland to remain part of the UK, and then 45% Catholic, traditionally people who would want Northern Ireland to reunify with the Republic of Ireland and be one island again. Now, the conflict, during the height of the conflict, around 3,500 people were killed, and the conflict is said to have come to an end in 1998, whenever the signing and then later implementation of the peace agreement came into play. Now, Northern Ireland is really interesting because although it is a post-conflict setting, young people are growing up with a legacy of conflict. Young people experience the divisions associated with conflict. Northern Ireland is still highly segregated as a society. So what that means is around 94% of young people attend a religiously separate school. So either a Catholic or Protestant school, which again reduces the opportunities for contact. And it's estimated that around 80% of young people in Northern Ireland have experienced political tensions, sectarianism, either directly or indirectly. So it's a really interesting context to think about these processes. So what we would argue with my collaborators and I is that in settings like Northern Ireland, we need more research to better understand how we can foster young people to become engaged citizens and to participate constructively in society. Now, if you've ever seen anything about Northern Ireland or in the news, or you've even been there, you will see these kind of symbols. So this one here on the top left and also in the bottom right, these are called peace lines, but actually they're barriers to separate communities. And these are in places where you've got Catholic and Protestant communities living side by side. Northern Ireland also has lots of political art, political murals that kind of say you do or do not belong in this place. Okay, so on the top right hand side you've got one here, and you've got someone with a gun saying welcome to this heartland, and UFF is a kind of political paramilitary in Northern Ireland. And then on the bottom corner you've got also another mural on a house that says prepared for peace but ready for war. So this is the kind of context that you see in Northern Ireland. So despite the critiques that I mentioned earlier around getting contact to happen in the first place, there is growing evidence that contact can do more than just encourage people to feel more positive towards different groups. And so I'm going to present to you a study that I've conducted where we wanted to know more about whether having more contact and better quality contact, so in terms of being positive, will be associated with young people having more positive attitudes towards peace building, and in turn, they would then engage more constructively in society. So this research was conducted under the premise that although we know that contact can promote more positive attitudes, little attention has really looked at these more peace and civic engagement effects that contact might result in. And what we argued here is that if we think about peace building as a positive and constructive orientation, that we could think about support for peace as being something that be promoted through contact. So the more I interact with people who are different, the more I may be willing to support peace processes in my society. And we know, for example, that having more contact is associated with other things like trust, reconciliation, forgiveness, and so on. So it seemed to make sense to us that contact would be associated with more peace-building attitudes. And further, that this kind of support for peace building would mean that young people would engage more positively in society in different ways. Now, I'm going to present to you a statistical model that might look a little bit scary, but I will walk you through what it means. So this model, what we did was we went into schools and we gave out questionnaires online to 14 to 15-year-olds in Belfast. So we had just under 500 young people complete our survey. They answered all sorts of questions about how much contact they have with people from the Catholic or Protestant community, how much they support peace building in society, and whether they volunteer or participate politically in society. Now, I won't bore you with the statistical methods behind this, but I'll talk you through what this means. So here we've got two aspects of contact. So we've got quantity, so how much people engage in contact, and we've got quality, how positive people feel about contact. Now, what these arrows show here is that young people who report having more contact, as well as better quality contact, report more support for peace building, okay? So this suggests to us actually contact can do more than reduce prejudice. It can make people feel more supportive of peace. But what we also see here is if we look at this one, which is support for peace building is associated with people being more likely to volunteer in society and also being more likely to engage in political participation. So in sum, what this complex diagram shows us is that young people who have more contact with people from the other group, who feel more positive, have more positive contact, are more likely to support peace building in society, and in turn are more likely to volunteer and help out in society, as well as engage politically. So this tells us that there's something potentially exciting here about the role of contact in promoting community relations amongst young people. In another study, what we were interested in understanding more about is, okay, we know that contact can be good. We know that from the previous study. We know that it can be associated with positive engagement. But what are the things that encourage that contact to happen in the first place? So here we were interested in norms. So norms of interaction support. So here, peer norms and school norms. By peer norms, what I mean is the extent to which my friends feel like it's okay for me to interact with people from the other group. Okay, so how much do I feel that my peers support me to do that? And then school norms. So how much do I think that my school and teachers support me as a person to interact with people from another group, in this case, Catholic or Protestant? So again, we conducted a survey study in schools in Belfast with 14 to 15-year-olds. This time we had them complete the survey at 2 different time points. So we had a nice 2-wave design. Now, again, this model again is complex, but I will talk you through what this means. So what we have here on the left is our measures of norms. So the support of our peers and teachers and schools in promoting contact. Now, what's really interesting here is that what we see is that it is peers that is associated with having more positive contact and also more contact. So what this means is that if I feel that my friends are really supportive of me engaging in contact, I report more contact and also better quality contact, okay? But we don't see any effect for school. So there's no relationship at all here that we found between feeling that your school supports you to interact and you actually interacting. So we can ignore the school part of this here because actually only peers are shown to be important. Now, what we see with peers is that if I feel that my peers support me to engage in contact, I report both having more contact and having better quality contact. And this in turn influences 2 things. It influences me in terms of I engage by helping other people from the other group more. So that means that's out-group pro-social behavior. So I'm willing to help across group lines. So I will help you even though you are not a member of my group. On the other side, we also see is that only for contact quality, so having more positive and meaningful contact, young people also report participating less in negative behaviors in society, in this case, sectarian antisocial behavior. So antisocial behavior that's targeted towards the other group. So the message here is really that peers, so friendship groups, seem to be really important in promoting contact, and in turn that this can both reduce negative participation in society in terms of the antisocial violent behaviors, as well as promote the positive behaviors in terms of helping across group lines. So the final study that I'd like to tell you about in this short talk is the shift towards education. So I, in the previous study, said that actually what seemed to matter more here was peers. And that's really interesting. But the other side of this is to remember that young people are in school a lot of the time. School is a site in which young people can learn about difference. Even if they don't have different people in their school, they can learn about difference. They can be prepared to negotiate and understand how to manage and embrace difference in a diverse world. So for me, education, as Nelson Mandela says, is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. So how can we as social psychologists use our theoretical understanding to promote relations within these types of contexts? So one study that we were interested in is thinking about to what extent can schools and teachers support young people to engage positively in society? Now, this is under the premise that teachers play a vital role in preparing young people, not just academically, but as global citizens, okay? And you will see a lot of the research in education really concentrates on this idea of teachers as supporting young people as future, the future of our society. So I'm going to present to you one final study that looked at the relationship between teacher support, something called collective efficacy, and engagement in different forms of action. So this again was a cross-sectional study, a survey study of 395 15 to 16-year-olds in Belfast. And what we were interested in here is understanding how teacher support, perceived teacher support in school would be associated with different levels of action. So we know from previous research, as I said, that schools and teachers have the power to influence young people beyond the educational domain. And we think that this could be particularly important in diverse and conflict settings. So we know that when teachers encourage young people to respect difference, to engage with others and so on, they can see heightened achievement, heightened engagement in school, better adjustment, better connectedness to school, and so on. But we haven't seen any studies that have really looked at how teachers could support young people to engage in society. And we think that this is important because you would imagine that if you feel really supported by your teacher, you think that your teacher supports you would feel more efficacious, like you could do something, that you could make a difference in society. And that in turn, this would influence whether you do actually engage in society. So again, it's thinking about this support. So what do I mean by efficacious? Well, here I mean having the feeling that you can and will be able to achieve something. And we know that efficacy is really important in academic achievement. So if I think I will do well in my exams, I'm more likely to do well in my exams. But it stands to reason that the same might apply for engaging in society. So if I feel supported by my teachers to engage in society, I will then feel more confident and effective in doing so if I choose to engage in society. So we know from a lot of social psychological research that this idea of efficacy or feeling efficacious is really important in engaging in action. So the research on collective action and on solidarity, on helping disadvantaged groups to improve their position in societies, that this idea of efficacy, that we can make a difference together collectively, is really important. So drawing on these kind of theoretical models, we were interested in understanding to what extent teachers would make young people feel more efficacious as students, as a group of students, and in turn, how this would influence two different forms of action. One, engagement in non-violent strategies, and two, collective action in support of refugees. So this is my last fancy statistical model for you. By now, you'll be an expert in reading these. So what we expected to see here is that if you feel more supported by your teachers, you'd feel more efficacious to engage collectively, and this would be associated with you being more likely to engage in non-violent strategies to managing conflict, and also be more likely to help across group lines, in this case, support for refugees. So as I said, this was with young people. This time we moved beyond the traditional divide in Northern Ireland of Catholic and Protestant, and we wanted to look at whether young people would also help to another group, and that is refugees within the Northern Ireland context. So what we've seen here is this is our perceived teacher support on the left-hand side. So what we've seen is if students perceive having teacher support, they feel more efficacious in school as students, so we can do better as students. And in turn, what this means is that young people are more likely to adopt non-violent strategies to dealing with conflict, and also more likely to engage in collective action to support refugees. So this is really interesting for us because it demonstrates that, yes, there is a role here that schools and teachers can play to promote more positive relations in society. Now, I will just get towards the end because I've got, I think, 1 or 2 minutes left. So in summary, what I wanted to convince you about in this short talk is that the positive role that intergroup contact and teacher support can play in promoting positive societal engagement amongst young people in conflict-affected settings like Northern Ireland. And really what this shows is that young people need to be seen as more than either just victims or troublemakers, and should be seen as peacemakers, as positive participators, as young people who can make a change in society. Now, I should accept some limitations of this work, okay? So I think one thing that's really important to remember with this type of research is that I'm asking people how they feel about things in surveys. We might not always get the true responses, right? You know, what some people are not going to say that they don't like groups. Some people are going to respond differently in surveys. Also, we don't know whether contact causes positive engagement, whether it's the other way around. Okay, we can't tell, we can't determine that direct link. It could be the other way because we don't know. We've only got this kind of cross-sectional measurement. And also another limitation in terms of what we ask. So we don't go out and observe people engaging in particular behaviors. We ask them whether they intend to or whether they have. And we all know what you say you do and what you do might be very different, okay? So again, this is another limitation. Despite these limitations, just to wrap up, I think that these collective findings have important implications both for theory and for practice. So in terms of theory and research, we show evidence that contact and efficacy and teacher support can really boost young people's engagement collectively and supportively and positively in society, even when there are these kind of tensions present. But what we also show here is that there's some implications potentially for practice. So for example, for teacher training programs, for promoting contact, for how we can then harness contact to have these positive effects that go within the school level, but also trickle beyond the school to the school gates. So really thinking about going above and beyond with contact theory. So just to end, thank you so much for inviting me to talk. I will say a huge thank you to my collaborators, especially Dr. Laura Taylor, who I've worked with on all of the studies that I presented today, to my research funders and to all my participants. So the school students, the teachers and the schools themselves for taking part. And I will now be very happy to take questions, and I'm sure Joe will moderate those. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Shelly, for your insightful talk today. Let's give her an online applause for her talk with our, with our Zoom emoticon reactions. So to wrap up her insightful presentation, she utilized the contact theory in order to explain and to understand what are the factors that may shape the peace building in the students, especially in the context of Northern Ireland. Okay, so she presented the 3 studies, which was very insightful. So the first studies she presented about the study in which she asked that do people really actually engage in the intergroup contact? Well, often people are not really, when they do some contact, they're not really actually engaging in the contact, but they are actually segregated, even though they meet each other. So she found that actually when people have a contact with each other, there will be some, more positive attitudes and more trust and peace-building attitudes between these students, which in turn shape behavior, such as volunteering and active participations. Okay, so this is important because, a lot of studies about contact is, they try to, understand contact based on does contact shape attitudes. But what Shelly has presented here, she also found that it can not only influence peace building attitudes, but it also influence volunteering and active participation. Also, she found that the norms, actually, like the peer norms and the school norms, actually very, very important in order for students to engage in contact with, between other students from the other identities. And she finally found that the role of the teacher is really, really influential and really, really crucial to encourage and push the students in order to do the engagement in the society, like so that they can be the agent of peace. Okay, so I invite maybe first 3 questions from the audience. Maybe we can, some of you would like to ask some question to Shelly. Oh, I have some questions from, there are some questions from the chat box here, from Nisha and Angelea. Okay, all right, so Nisha, thank you for the very insightful presentation, Dr. Mckeon Jones. He said thank you to you. And I would like to ask some questions. Would the different context settings, such as structured diverse classroom or informal diverse settings, might influence the effectiveness and the quality of the contact? That's her first question. And the second question is, would the intention or the willingness in engaging in contact influence the effectiveness of the contact? Okay, would you like to answer that first?
Yeah. So around the structure, I think that's a really important point, because my experience is that if you bring people together, you can't expect them to interact in a meaningful way without you structuring that somehow. So whenever I did my PhD research, what I found was that when you had the informal contact, so for example, you had a diverse school, that young people would actually stay separate still, so they wouldn't necessarily interact. Whereas when we worked with a community relations program where they actively promoted contact, that's where we've seen greater shifts in prejudice and greater engagement in contact. So for example, I can give you one example of the kind of things that community relations organization did. So flags in Northern Ireland, so country flags, are very controversial. And what the organization did as one of the tasks was put 2 different flags in the room, one in each corner of the room, representing 2 different groups. So the Irish tricolour flag and the Union Jack United Kingdom flag. And then they asked young people to go and stand with whatever flag they felt most comfortable with. And then they had a conversation about why you're standing, why am I standing at this flag whilst you're standing at the other flag? What does that flag mean to you? And so on. So my argument is always that in order to make the best out of contact, you need to have conversations about difference. Now, that is very difficult because what you don't want to do is have contact where you immediately challenge each other and feel threatened. So contact needs to start on an individual level. But if you never address the issues, then I think it's not going to work properly, okay? Because you have to acknowledge at some point that actually the reason you're against each other is because of group difference or because of something else. So I think those structured activities work. And I do quite a lot when I'm teaching at university as well. Actually, I do things like there's something called the jigsaw classroom where you share information, you share ideas, and that's really exciting across different groups, and you swap groups and you change groups. I didn't tell you about, but I've also done some intervention studies in schools. So designing interventions with teachers where we structure contact and we promote discussing of difference, and then we evaluate whether that works. And the second point around intention, I think, is really important. So I think if we left it where you had to choose, then I think a lot of people would choose not to engage in contact. And this is why making the most out of spaces where young people have to, or where there is naturally contact, then you can make that happen in a better way. But there are also mechanisms to support people for contact when they don't have that direct contact. So one is indirect forms of contact. So for example, if you share storybooks, or you talk online, or you meet people through other mechanisms that's not kind of face-to-face direct contact, that can also be really positive, and you can prepare people. So I think part of this is, especially if you've got a very contested conflict setting, you don't want to just put people together and hope that they'll be okay, because actually that contact might be negative and that contact might make things worse. So, you do need to be careful, I think, with that. I think we have, I'm doing your job, Joe, but I see some other questions, so I can just answer those. So Angelia, so you asked some questions about older and younger generations, and I think that's really fascinating, because actually, I think young people also in our context are becoming more engaged. And I think in Northern Ireland it's the case partly because the conflict is now lower level and young people can go out on the streets now, whereas it was dangerous 30 years ago to be in the streets of Northern Ireland. And young people now can gather, they can protest, they can be active. But you've also raised an important question here, because actually contact is not just about people of the same generation, or it's not just about ethnicity or race. There's also the importance of having contact across these generational divides. And I haven't done research in that area, but the same principles would apply. But you have these ideological differences, as you're saying, Angela, in terms of, okay, well, we might have, as we get older, become more conservative and become more concerned with things, that young people are more open and more liberal towards difference, and how do we then reconcile that? So I think that's a really important question to start asking, and for us to think about as researchers about how actually do we address this, these generational differences. So thank you for your points around that.
Okay, thank you, Shelly. Right, we have our third question from Wawan. He said, first of all, thank you for presenting this great research. And he said that he read some research from Semeru, one of the research institution in Indonesia, which found that youth find it difficult to participate in society since their family environment doesn't give support for this because of lack of participative communication with the family. Even families find it very difficult to accept their children's opinions. So maybe this is something that is, related to cultural thing or something. So do you have some opinions about this?
Yeah.
Question?
So this is also a really great point, Wawan. Thank you so much for that. So I think one of the biggest critiques of some of the research on contact theory is that it assumes that people or young people are kind of in an isolation bubble, right? So it's just about their attitudes, and there's not that people forget, but there's not always a consideration in the research designs about the fact that young people are nested within a school, they're nested within a family, they're nested within a community. And what schools often say to me is, we can only do so much, because at the end of the day, a young person goes home to a family and a community. Now, what we want to do more about, we've done a little bit, but not as much, we're starting to do it now in the new project, is look at how parent attitudes influence young people's engagement. So we know that relationship is bi-directional. So what I mean by that is, we know that parents can influence young people, right? So if parents prevent young people, or they have strong opinions, that means that young people can't tell them what they're doing or can't do certain things, that influences young people. But we also know that it can work the other way. So if young people come home telling parents about a really positive interaction, that can influence parental attitudes as well. So what we need to do more about is understand that family nature. And I think it also points to the need for intervention, to not just think about, okay, young people are in schools, how do we make things in schools better, but also actually young people are in families and in communities. So how do we then work with parents, so that parents are having, those discussions amongst themselves and also with their young people. So we have done some work on family ethnic socialization, and that is how much family members talk about ethnic identity at home, and how much that can be a buffering factor. So encouraging young people to not feel discrimination as much because they feel supported at home, but also how that can be associated with negative attitudes towards other groups. So if that's all if that's all you're told about in terms of ethnicity or a group, then that can then be problematic in terms of understanding other groups in society. So I think my answer is absolutely, family is really important, and I think we don't know enough about it yet, but we should do. Thank you.
Yeah, that's his second question. Is there any particular reason for not including family factor in this research? And you have answered that, so maybe next time you would like to do that. All right.
Yeah.
So the fourth question, or we have a lot of students who are really interested in your talk here. Okay, so from Rafi, she asked that you previously mentioned that school norms don't necessarily promote good and healthy contact, yet the teachers have a large effect to promote such things. What would be the difference between the two, and does that mean teachers are more toward peer norms?
Yeah, so the difference here between these two specific measures might offer some answer to this question. So school norms was measured by asking, the questions were things like, my teachers support me to interact with people from the other group. My teachers encourage me to interact with people from the other group. And it may be that there's no negative relationship. So it means, what that means is it's not that teachers are not doing it or that it's not affecting things, but that in this particular sample, that school didn't come out as being important in predicting the relationships. But there may be a weird kind of overlap there, because if you think about young people, they actually make their friends in school. So it may be that there's a conflation there between school norms and between peer norms, where they're seen as almost the same, but peers are seen as more important, because at 14 and 15, your peers are seen more as more important, right? We all know that we don't want to say, oh, the school's, it's not about the school, it's about yeah, it's about our friends. We don't care what the teachers think. But also it could be that actually for young people, whether teachers support them to interact or not doesn't matter so much in predicting their friendships. It's more about who they want to interact with. So it could be that. And then in the second study, what we measured was teacher general support. So to what extent teachers, you feel listened to, you feel supported in school in general, so not about interactions. So what this suggests is actually this general support is really important, and it doesn't have to just be that support about interaction specifically. But if you feel supported, that you belong and that you're engaged in school, that can have knock-on effects. So I think schools are really important, and I was kind of disappointed not to see school norms come out, but it could just be a function of the age group, the particular sample. I wouldn't take it as meaning that schools don't matter in that regard, because I think they do. It's probably just some of the peculiarities of that particular measurement.
Right. And we have our last question. I believe it's from Muhammad Taufik. He asked, is there any special questionnaire form for intergroup contact? Or is it intra-group contact or intergroup contact? Maybe
Inter.
Yeah, I think it's
so,
the inter, but he said it. I think there are a lot, but maybe Shelly, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there are many. So there's one by Alberto Focchi and Miles Houston that's quite well known. So the questions typically would ask, so let's say for quantity of contact, so how much, there'd be usually about 3 or 4 questions, and it would say something like, how much do you interact with the Protestant community at school? How much do you interact with the Catholic community in your neighborhood? How much do you interact with the Protestant community across all social situations, e.g. in the park, when you're hanging around, like all those sorts of things. And then for the quality of contact, so how positive it is, would usually ask things like, when you meet people from the Protestant or Catholic or whatever community it is, do you find the contact pleasant or unpleasant? Do you find it competitive or cooperative? Do you find it casual or meaningful? Right? So those are the kind of things that are asked. But there's certainly lots and lots of different ways of asking it. But those are the kind of 2 main ways Quantity, so how much, frequency, how much does it happen? And quality, when it does happen, how good is it?
All right. Yeah, so Muhammad Taufik, if you would like to, see what has been used by Dr. Shelly in her, research about intergroup contact and what are the questionnaires, you can, read her research, and you can search it via Google Scholar or any database for the research that you can find. Okay, so I think that concludes our first talk from Dr. Shelly. Let's give her another round of applause. Online applause, of course. We can't really hear an applause if it's offline. And I'm sorry, Angel, because I didn't read your first chat before. I only see your second chat, but I think Dr. Shelly has already answered your question. Yeah, so thank you for your question. All right, so thank you, Shelly, again. A very insightful talk, and we hope that next time we can, maybe we'll do some, maybe you are, be willing to be invited to another speech in the Universitas Indonesia. All right, so our next speaker is Dr. Mira Nurmila. Mbak Medi, bolehkah ditampilkan CV-nya?
Maaf Mas Jo, untuk sesi foto.
Oh ya, oke ya. Terima kasih Mbak Medi sudah diingatkan. Alright, before we proceed to the second session of our webinars, let's take a group photo first for this event. Please, everyone, turn on your camera, and Mbak Rani would lead you to our photo session. Okay, Mbak Rani, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mas Jo. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Rani. I will guide the session photo. Ladies and gentlemen, please open your camera. The picture will be taken several times. I will start counting to take first slide. Okay. Ready? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Second slide. 1, 2, 3. Third slide. 1, 2, 3. Fourth slide. 1, 2, 3. Fifth slide. 1, 2, 3. The last slide. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. The photo session was over, and I will return the session to Mas Jo. Thank you.
Thank you, Mbak Rani. You have a lot of attendees, Mbak Mira and Shelly. All right, yeah, let's read Mbak Mira's CV. Mbak Medi, could you please show the CV? All right, thank you, Mbak Medi. So our second speaker is Dr. Mira Nurmila. I'm sure many of you have already know her because she's also one of the lecturer in the Faculty of Psychology, Universitas Indonesia. So Dr. Mira Nurmila is an associate professor in Laboratory of Political Psychology, Faculty of Psychology, Universitas Indonesia. And her research focuses on the topic of terrorism, extremism, radicalism, and intergroup conflict. Okay, she is also my PhD supervisor, actually. So I'm a little bit nervous now. Right, so she received numerous research grants, including the UNDP Protect project worth USD 103 more than 103,000 worth of project, along with Professor Hamdi Muluk. And she has also received numerous awards, including Park Jung-hyun Young Award for Excellence in Research, awarded by Asian Association of Indigenous and Cultural Psychology in 2014. Right now, she is also a chair in the Indonesian Social Psychological Association, or Ikatan Psikologi Sosial HIMSI. And she's also a chair of the psychology team of the Center for De-Radicalization Program, National Bureau of Terrorism Combat or BNPT. Okay, Dr. Mira, without further ado, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Joe. Is my voice is clear or not?
Yes, it's really clear, Mbak Mira.
Okay, thank you. And also my slide. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes. Okay.
Clearly.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Joe, and also very interesting lecture from Dr. Shelly. My topic here is not specifically talking about peace building, but it's kind of prevention in conflict prevention. And my topic and title of De-Radicalization and Maintaining Tolerance of Indonesian Muslim Youth. But I will present my research not specifically only in youth population in Indonesia. As we know about the conflict and terrorism in Indonesia, that several areas in Indonesia have become a breeding of ground for terror group. Example is Maluku, Poso, North Maluku. The conflict area is also used as military training camp for jihad preparation, or we call it that for jihadist group. Young people are vulnerable group who are the target of recruitment of violent extremist group. Propaganda of extremism and radicalism thrive in area exposed to conflict and violence. Now I will explain the landscape of potential conflict in Indonesia based on our survey in 2000 and 2021 with a political psychology laboratory team. Here we conduct national survey in 34 provinces in Indonesia, use stratified random sampling with the composition demographic as you see here. And before we doing our survey, we also try to portray the most unlikable group in Indonesia. As you can see here, that many of group in Indonesia are most unlikable with LGBT. So you can see that not as only for conservative or religious, but for the many group in Indonesia. This is the potential for conflict indicator that we use for compiling the potential for conflict index. We use pro-peace and pro-conflict indicator in developing the potential conflict index. The correlation pro-peace with support for violence was negative significant, and the correlation pro-conflict with government satisfaction and with national identity was also negative significant. Meanwhile, political intolerance is correlated with support for democracy, and religious intolerance is correlated with national identity. And violent act intention, and while violent act intention is correlated with religious conservatism. As you can see here, that our pro-peace indicator is in color with orange color, and pro-conflict indicator is with a blue color here. And here the result, that potential based on our result, potential for conflict indicator, we have a 3 area This Maluku, North Maluku, and Nangro Aceh Darussalam are shown as the three regions that has the highest potential for conflict index in Indonesia, where all three are areas that have a history of conflict. Meanwhile, in South Sumatra, as in a fourth rank in potential for conflict index, was observed that were high in criminality rate. And if we take a look detail from the indicator that compiled for indicator for conflict, potential conflict, we can see that the top of 5 provinces with the higher score for potential conflict indicator have a problem with the support for violence, and also in religious intolerance and religious conservatism. But not have a problem with the national identity. As you can see, the green color here is the score of national identity is tend to high in national identity and also social trust. But in the red color, it shows that the score in support for violence is also high in the top of indicator of support for violence in Indonesia. So Maluku, North Maluku, Nangro Aceh Darussalam, South Sumatra, and Rio Island have a high in support for violence. It means that they have a score higher than median score in total average in Indonesia. And we also find that according to the intolerance between extremists and moderate religious dimension of political ideology, there is different pattern here between extreme religious conservative and extreme liberal in political and religious intolerance, which extreme religious conservative tend to have higher religious intolerance compared to moderate, and extreme liberal to have lower compared to moderate. But extreme religious conservative tend to have higher political intolerance compared to moderate and extreme liberal, but moderate tend to have lower compared to extreme and liberal here. So there is a different pattern between political intolerance and religious intolerance if we see the difference between extreme and moderate religious political dimension. So our conclusion is as from the national survey data, area with a history of conflict tend to have higher potential for conflict, as well as area with high support for violent and religious conservatism and intolerance, as well as high collective narcissism and tend to be low in satisfaction with the government, but tend not to have problem with national identity and social trust. And extreme religious conservative are shown tend to be consistent in intolerant attitude, both political and religious. Now, I want to explain from the data from the terrorist tiny, and we can see the insight from the deradicalization program. As shown from the national data survey, that religious intolerance and also religious conservatism is as a strong predictor for conflict in Indonesia. But it's not always explain the terrorism or extremist incident in Indonesia. As we can, I want to explain here, as many predictor or many factors that can explain how we can prevent the conflict. So the potential conflict is only area that would be with the political or social issue that can be trigger the conflict. Most likely will be happen in that area, but it is not always lead to terrorism or radicalism in that area. And then what we can do to protect the conflict in Indonesia, in Indonesian context, because our data is in Indonesian context. And then we can see the data from the terrorist group, the Tiny. This is from our study with Mas Jo Varian. We can find here that individuals who have ideological quest for significance and they have experienced contact for cross-group friendship tend to be less likely to join radical group. On the other hand, if they have homogeneous or exclusive contact experience, they tend to be more likely to join radical group. So based on the area that might be as a contextual factor, social, political, culture, that may be that vulnerable to be breeding as a conflict area. There is also an individual that have vulnerability. Young people is the most vulnerable that would be recruited by extremist group. But here, it would be not automatically become an extremist or radicalist or terrorist, except that they join to the radical group here. So our study is try to predict what the factor maybe can be explained young people join to the radical group. So the vulnerable individual is the individual that have ideological quest for significance as a motivation. But if they allow in cross-group friendship, they will be more likely to join the radical group. But if they have experience a cross-group friendship, they would be tend not to join the radical group. And this is our study in general population in high school in Indonesia. We use an experiment study to confirm the role of critical thinking and social identity complexity. We use counterbalance design here. As you can see here, that critical thinking and social identity complexity have effect to support for radicalism. But if that individual that have critical thinking first, we will intervention here with critical thinking first. It would be most likely there will be less support for radicalism compared to if we give them a social identity complexity first. The explanation maybe because it's critical thinking itself, it's not enough, or it's not if we have a critical thinking, then we don't have a social identity complexity. We tend to criticize our not our group but out group. So if critical thinking high, it not always have a positive or less support for radicalism. But if critical thinking with high social identity complexity, then it would be lead to less support for radicalism. And this is also from our data from terrorist tiny is also our paper with Dr. Joe Varian. As you can see here, that counter finality of identity has as a mediator, as mediate the attitude toward rehabilitation to support for jihad kita. So many of terrorist tiny who have positive attitude toward rehabilitation, and then they also develop counter finality of identity. We use intervention to developing alternative identity, based on multi theory from Kruglanski concept of significant quest theory, that individuals that only have a single identity and single goal is tend to be radical. So we try to develop an alternative identity so they can also develop an alternative goal, and then there will be less support for extremist ideology. In this context, is ideology of jihad kita, and this is moderate by significance of jihad. And then our research is accepted paper. The model is test the role of group identity, that many people that have vulnerability of significance, a quest for significance, it's not always automatically will be joined or will be support to violent extremism, but they will be mediated by group identity and ideology. So this is the role of group identity that will give them the terrorist justifying ideology, will be lead them to violent extremism. So what we will try to explain here, the role of the group is very important to lead the individual to violent extremism. So for the insight for the deradicalization program and also from the national survey, we can conclude the several points that we can explain the potential conflict and the how to prevent the conflict in Indonesia. Strengthening religious conservatism correlate with increasing intolerance and potential for conflict in Indonesia. And social, political, and historical factors explain the potential for conflict in a specific area in Indonesia. The conflict area is also vulnerable to the breeding of violent extremist group. The existence of this extremist group will attract vulnerable individuals in terms of low identity complexity and quest for significance, and developing harmonized alternative identity and positive contact experience between groups tend to decrease support for violent extremism. Okay, Mas Jo, I will stop my presentation here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Mira, for your presentation. This is, I think, really, really relatable for us all, because this is something that is really, really close to our home. Yeah, and I, from Dr. Mira's presentation, we know that within the within for the majority of Muslim youth and Muslim population, maybe there are several groups which tend to be targeted as a target of prejudice, such as she presented, for example, like LGBT people and maybe PKI, is that correct? Yeah, one of the identities. And so she researched about whether such intolerance toward targeted groups is a function of political ideology. And so she found that the more conservative you are more likely to show intolerance toward the targeted groups. But this is an extreme conservative, yeah, and then versus the extreme liberals, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, Mbak Mira. And this is actually this counters the previous assumption that the more extreme you are, whether you are liberals or whether you are conservatives, then you are more likely to show intolerance, right? But here, Mbak Mira shows us that it's, the conservatives are more likely to show intolerance compared to extreme liberals. Even though, the target group is actually different. Okay, liberal groups tend to hate several groups and conservatives tend to hate other groups, right? But here, Mbak Mira found that conservatives tend to show intolerance. Also, she found that it's the research about whether ideology, a person who thinks that their religion is something that is meaningful, whether it can transform into a commitment toward the extremist group. But she found that when someone has an ideology that is, they search for meaning from their ideology, and this is an extreme ideology, these persons are more likely to be, resistant toward, forming a bond between friendship bond between the people from the other identities. And so she said that it is important for us, actually, this is also consistent with what Shelly said, that it is important to, have a contact or have a interaction experience with other people from other identities. She also found that actually the intolerance and extreme attitudes is also a function of critical thinking, but critical thinking is not the sole factor which can shape, which can reduce the intolerance, because critical thinking should be also accompanied with the social identity here. And so that because sometimes critical thinking is not really, a lot of people who are intolerant also exhibit critical thinking, but they are more critical toward other groups rather than their groups. Okay, so it's important not to just see critical thinking as the sole solution, but it should also be accompanied with social identity consolidation. And also her two final research deals with the jihadist group, in which that this is, she found that actually when we have many identities in our lives, including, for example, like we have a lot of identity that we see as important, such as peer group, such as our best friends, our romantic partners, our family, and so on, then we are more likely to be less committed toward the jihadist identity, in which here it is like an extremist jihadist identity. Yeah, there are a lot of jihadist identity, I believe, and this happens even though your religion is something that is meaningful to you, according to her research. So actually, when you have a lot of different friends, different identities, different things that you see as meaningful in your life, it is more important. It can more likely to shape your attitudes, intergroup attitudes that is more friendly, rather than religion. Okay, so religion is not the primary source of intolerance here. It's actually secondary. It's not really that important in shaping the hatred, actually. And this is consistent with what Shelly also said earlier about that the conflict in Northern Ireland is even though it's about a religious group, actually it's more political. The issue is more political. Okay, so that's I think a very, very important message from Dr. Mira, and I invite several questions. Oh yeah, if you want to ask a question, I forgot to mention this earlier, but you can also do it via microphone, yeah, not only just via chat, okay? But I already have several questions here. The first is from Kak Amores from Harmony. Thanks for sharing your fascinating work. I am interested in the role of national identity in your study. Grateful if you could explain it a tad further. In your observation, what would be the role of national identity on the religious intolerance and radicalization? Thank you so much. Would you like to answer that, Mira?
Okay, this is a very interesting question. Thank you, Amores Harmony. Yeah, in our data from the national survey, in most in most province in Indonesia is tend to have high in national identity. So if we try to compile the index, so national identity is not have cannot be as good a predictor explanation for the conflict in Indonesia, because we all tend to have high in national identity and also in social trust. So national identity is not our problem here, but in what's the strong predictor from the conflict in Indonesia is political intolerance. In another survey that I conducted before from the radical and non-radical group, is also can be see that a group with high in religious conservatism is also can have a high in social and national identity. So the identity of religious conservatism, religious identity and national identity is not always conflict in this in Indonesia. And also for in religious conservative group also, it's not always conflict between religious and national identity. But if we have, or if the individual have an extreme religious conservatism in terms of ideology, so this is the national identity is cannot always be as a protective from for conflict, because extreme religious conservatism tend to have intolerant attitude, both on political or religious, intra or interreligious. So what's the problem here is ideology. I think that if we, how the extreme religious, how individual can embrace the extreme religious ideology, more likely they have history in affiliation with religious conservative or extremist religious group also, because the extreme ideology is will be strengthened in a group, as I explained before in our model. And how it would be related with radicalization. The radicalization is a process. It will be first with the intolerant attitude, and then with strengthening in identity and group identification, and then strength with ideology, group ideology, and then justification. So intolerant, it's not always explain the extremism or radicalization, but intolerance will be lead to radicalization. Okay, I think is
Right.
that my answer.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mira. Kamores has another question, but let's proceed to our second question first from Angel. She said thank you, Mbak Mira, for the insightful presentation. I have two questions, if I may. There have been little to no big or extreme scale terror attack for the past years in Indonesia. The biggest one was in the 2005-ish, Bali or Marriott. Right now, she believes that there are now a lot of political events that could evoke the rise of terrorism again. But she don't see it as a case. In fact, the last big-scale Islamic protest was Gerakan 212 as somewhat peaceful one, though there are still some terrorist attacks here and there. How come this kind of trend can happen where there's little to no trace of terrorist groups moving their action? Are our youths now have little tendency to be exposed with radical and extreme religious ideology? That's her first question. Maybe you would like to answer that first before we can proceed to her.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Very long question. Thank you, Angela. Angela. Yeah. If we can see in maybe is about 10 years after bom Bali or Marriott, Indonesia have several terror attack also, but not as big as in bom Bali or Marriott before. But now, yeah, as the data from the Detachment Khusus who dealing with the terror group hard approach in terrorist group in Indonesia is have about 1,000 tiny terrorists tiny in Indonesian prison. So I think this is a big number of terrorists tiny. Maybe in compared to another country. So if we not have a big terrorist incident in Indonesia, it is not because we don't have a problem with terrorism and extremism in Indonesia. But what the Angela asks is about is also that the intergroup relation in Indonesia and conflict and also the political constellation in Indonesia is tend to show a peace movement. It's not always violent. Yes. And this is also the other side that we can observe here, that in general population, the problem of extremism is no move to general population also. It's not always in extremist or specific extremist group like in many radical or extremist group in Indonesia. But I think that your second question is, now we have it's other research that I do before also, but I'm not present here. We have a trend that the political extremism is also high in youth population in Indonesia. But this is the different with the extremism in that they also affiliate or engage with extremist group. I will try to explain first that there is a vulnerability and there is also push factor and pull factor. From the youth population in Indonesia, that they show a high extreme ideology is a vulnerable group. They have vulnerability in motivation, especially in identity and perceived injustice. But most likely of them are not engaged in a specific extreme group. So we have to prevent them to be recruited by extreme group. So the extremist ideology that try to in youth population, it will not become extremist violent activity or incident in Indonesia. So we have a problem with the big number of vulnerability group in youth population in Indonesia. This is also as an effect of a polarization, political polarization in Indonesia, and then many of political ideology group in Indonesia tend to have a strong attitude, and then to polar to become more strong in their ideology commitment between left and right. I think that's the answer for Angela. For those who have been successfully de-radicalized, there's still any chance? Yes, yes, there's still any chance. We never have know that we are successfully or not successfully radicalized, but what we are doing is we always assess regularly many extremists or terrorist detainee in the prison. Yes, before the release, we conduct assessment. So we know that after the release, they can be treated by not by prison, but by the other program. But as you know, that ideology is that something that very it's not easy. It's hard to change. So as we in our data from the deradicalization program, our successful in changing the ideology is low, but we can increasing the support for the democracy and the NKRI, and then we can increase the tendency to be inclusive and have experience in contact. What is Dr. Shelly explained about intergroup context is one of the best challenge for the deradicalization, because from the experience positive contact, it will be lead them to be evaluated by their own self, yes, to evaluate their belief. But if we try to evaluate or challenge their belief, they would be resistant. So this is a long process to be deradicalized. After we can make sure that he become and have a role in inclusive society in society. Before that, we never know that we are successful or not to radicalize the terrorists in prison. But if they have a high and positive attitude toward government and also in the diversity, but in the society, they experience isolation or social exclusion, it will be vulnerable again to be recruited by the extremist or terrorist group. Yeah, so here is inclusive and positive contact between group is very important to maintain in the society. Okay, Mas Jo, about social identity complexity.
Complexity, yes.
Yes. I will give you example. If I have our questionnaire is asked about please describe more than three identity that you have, and how the identity is meant to you. So we will see that how many identity they have, how you describe yourself, and that how it's meant to you. So it's not about how many we have identity or how many we can describe myself as a student, as a singer, as whatever you have, but it's also have to be harmonized each other, because in other research, in many social identity complexity, if we have more complex in identity, we also to be more high in uncertainty. So if we have high in uncertainty, we tend to embrace an extreme ideology, or to be vulnerable to be recruited in radical or extremist group, because high in uncertainty identity is tend to be more to be fit with a group entity, with which is a feature of a extremist group, as always give the entity a certainty for the individual with high in uncertainty. So this is not about how many identity we have, but the identity, it should be harmonized with each other. Okay.
Right. And he also asked about whether you've done some works, like for if you have come across in your work on the role of existing Pancasila education in fostering the SIC, social identity complexity. Is it about the Pancasila is identity, or is it about other identities? Maybe.
It's a very interesting question, but also it's a difficult question, because we have a problem. I think that I'd like to, why I choose to use national identity as that commitment in Pancasila, because I don't know. I think maybe we have to discuss that Pancasila is an ideology or something before ideology, or what, I don't. But Pancasila as identity, I never measure Pancasila as ideology. But maybe Mas Eko, yeah, that has a lecture on Pancasila and civic education, has many research in this area. But what the important thing here is what I found in my research is the acceptance of diversity. The diversity is have important predictor as to in a little less support for radical group. So the diversity itself is. But if talking about Pancasila education, what kind of Pancasila education? Yes, maybe in the Pancasila education is also teaching about diversity, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, and also a national identity complex. But I don't have any research in this topic.
Okay. Yeah, we have 5 more minutes to go before we end our webinars for today. Maybe, and we have exactly 2 more questions. So first question is from Muhammad Taufik. He asked about the latest method of de-radicalization. I think you have already explained that before, right? When you answered Angel in her question, or is there anything that you would like to add to that?
A latest method to de-radicalization. Yes, I think in Indonesia we always compare with integrative soft approach. So we use soft approach method in the radicalization. That also we use prior psychological intervention before ideological intervention. So this is still the current method we use in the radicalization program. But as you said, that there are many jihadis in Indonesia back to extremist ideology. Yes, not many, I think, as a statistic. There are some, but as in number is very low compared to Saudi Arabia. Yes, in average is more than 3% are high, but in Indonesia it's less than 3%. But it's still we have a homework here that if the radicalization can decrease or increase the support for democracy and NKRI, does not always mean that it's guaranteed that there will be not come back to the extremist activity or terrorist activity. This is also we can make sure that in society they have also experienced inclusive and positive contact too, and have a role, a significant role in society. So the deradicalization program is not enough if we do in prison, but it's also in community. But the actor here is not always the government, but also the community. As mentioned and explained by Dr. Shelly before, that we have to structure the contact that will be support for the inclusive and the positive contact between groups. So this is the challenge for the deradicalization, especially for the extremists or terrorism detainee after their release.
All right. Okay, thank you, Mbak Mira. We have 1 more minute, but I think we should reserve that for our closing. There is one final question by Nisha. Maybe Nisha, you can ask Mbak Mira directly after this. So I'm sorry that your question is not really featured as the last question. Okay, yeah, but very interesting topic today. And yes, I believe that one of the keyword for our today's webinars is contact, actually. So actually this is also a form of contact in which that we get to know, and we invited Dr. Shelly to talk in our webinars, in which that she introduced us with the the issues that is persisting in the Northern Ireland about the prejudice and so on. So we hope that this is this meeting is not, this will not be our last meeting with her, and perhaps if you are interested in know more, maybe you can email her and maybe for the questionnaire or something, maybe you can also ask her about that, and you can research about her studies, her works in a lot of database that is available on the internet. Okay, thank you so much again, Dr. Mira and Dr. Shelly, for the great talk today. And yeah, I would like to before we end our webinar, I would like to invite you all to our second webinars, which will be held next week, actually. Yeah, it's about the prevention of about the COVID-19 prevention, and whether economic factors or health factors plays a more important role in the human psychology. And so maybe Mbak Midi, or you can show us yes, this is the poster. And yeah, don't forget to register and to attend this next webinars. And we will have other webinars in the next years as well. So stay tuned. Okay, so again, thank you so much, Dr. Shelly and Dr. Mira, for attending this webinar and for your great talk. Thank you so much for Dr. Icha, Dr. Rizka Halida for holding this seminar in the first place, and for all of the committees, and of course for all of the audience. Thank you so much for your attendance. We'll see you again in the next events, and so take care and stay safe. Bye.